Well, welcome everyone to what is the first of the SDGs in Action seminar series. I'm John Thwaites and I'm the chair of Monash Sustainable Development Institute, and welcome to our office here today. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land where we are meeting, the people of Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present and emerging. And of course acknowledge the deep importance of our relationship with the Indigenous community as we discuss the implementation of the SDGs. Now, just by way of background, what we're doing here today, we've been, this has been organised by Monash Sustainable Development Institute and Deakin, but it's a part of a series that the Sustainable Development Solutions Network is planning to have on the SDGs. Now, what's the Sustainable Development, SDSN, Sustainable Development Solutions Network? It's an organisation which was set up at the behest of the Secretary General of the UN in 2012 to mobilise universities around the world behind the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. And there are now more than 1,000 universities and knowledge institutions that are part of the SDSN. Monash is the host for SDSN Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific, but that network has 30 members, I think it is 30 or 31 members, including Deakin. And our aim is to work together across universities to help advance the Sustainable Development Goals. And we're really seeing this series of seminars, the SDGs in Action, as a way to do that. So we can share knowledge across different universities and indeed with public sector and business about what's actually happening, what we can do to implement the goals. So I think we've got a really interesting day ahead of us. And what we're going to focus today is on a specific aspect of implementation of the SDGs, and that's localisation. How do you localise the SDGs for local communities? Now, when the SDGs were agreed, of course, they were agreed by nations, and the nations themselves agreed to those 17 goals and 169 targets, which are national targets. But in the 2030 Agenda Agreement that all the countries signed, they acknowledged that those national targets would only be met if the SDGs were also implemented by business and by subnational governments and by local communities. So I think today is really about how are local communities helping to implement the SDGs, and what can we learn from research projects that we're going to hear from about how to achieve that. So without any further ado, I'm going to call upon Dr. Enya Malemi, who's a research fellow on the project, and he's going to facilitate the opening session, and then we're going to hear from a number of the people who are actually doing the research and engaging with it, and there'll be plenty of opportunity for everyone to interact and to talk and ask questions. So, welcome, Enya.
Oh yeah, you might get it.
Hi everyone, and good evening. My name is Enya Malemi. I'm a research fellow at Deakin University, and I'm also the Local SDGs Program. I would like to welcome you again, and I hope you enjoyed the talks and discussions that we have today about the topic of local sustainability. And on the behalf of the Deakin team, I would like also to thank SDSN and also NSTI for organizing this event and for creating this opportunity to further discuss about the importance that a local bottom-up approach can have in the achievement of sustainable development goals. Just a brief introductions to the structure of the first part of the event. We have three complementary presentations by esteemed speakers from research, community, and the state government. And they will share with us their views and their experiences of working within the SDGs framework and also their role in the local SDG program. At the end of each presentation, we have time for perhaps one or two specific questions regarding the presentation, but we have extensive time during the Q&A discussions at the end of three presentations for further discussions and also for more questions. For now, I'm delighted to introduce the Alfred Deakin Professor Brett Bryan to share with us his views and experience of working with SDGs in science and research. Brett is also the Local SDGs Program Director. Please.
Thanks, Anya, and also again, thanks MSDI for hosting and SDSN. Great to be here talking to you about our project that's been underway for about a year now, Local Agenda 2030. It's a collaborative project with MSDI, the forest community, North Central, up in the CMA up in Northern Victoria, and funded by the Ian Potter Foundation. So what I'll talk about is the science objective, and in particular, I'll focus tonight on how local communities can structure decision-making in order to progress towards a more sustainable future under lots of uncertainty into what the future might look like. Aligned with this is a strong participatory component, which Katrina and Dan will talk about after me. So by virtue of you being here, I assume that you've seen and are intimately familiar with the global UN Sustainable Development Goals. 17 goals that are set up to guide humanity's shared aspirations towards a more sustainable future. Under those, there's around 169 targets and 232 individual indicators to track and measure and monitor humanity's progress towards those individual goals. So these are not isolated goals. They're not designed to achieve one or a handful, but not the others. We need to achieve them all at once. There's systematic linkages between them, trade-offs and co-benefits between them. And they, as John mentioned in his introduction, the ambition here is to leave nobody behind. So they're designed for governments, for schools, for industry, for commerce, and the public sector and so on, to all galvanise us all towards this shared ambition for 2030. How is Australia doing? Not so great. So this is the SDG index, the website's there. So there we go. And so here's the top 10, all European countries, and down here number 38 is Australia. We can do better. We're down at 38 because we're of a fairly abysmal performance on climate and other environmental targets, also rising inequality and so on. So 38, we need to do better as a country. And part of this project is about how do we do that. What's happening at the Commonwealth level? So these are global goals. What's happening at the national level in Australia? Well, if you walk down London Circuit in Canberra, you'll see on the windows of DFAT the SDGs in full glory. A clear messaging that the government is looking at this seriously, but what is actually behind the Commonwealth efforts to achieve the goals? Is it substantive? What's happening at the state level? And this is a relatively recent mapping of the DELWP priorities and targets: zero emissions, resilient biodiverse environment, sustainable water, and there's a few others beneath that that have been mapped to the SDGs, primary SDGs or core, and then some sub goals there as well. In Victoria as well, the mapping of the environmental reporting and monitoring is now taking a SDG approach towards long-term monitoring to track our progress as a state. So global goals, nationals and national objective there somewhere, starting to come into state policy. But what we're about here is, as John mentioned, this needs everybody to act. So how do we now implement these at the local level? This is what this project is about. There's not much time left. 5 years has already passed. These goals were signed in 2015. We've got 10 years left. The deadline's by 2030. So top-down approaches are necessary, but not sufficient. So we need them there. We need those policy supports, infrastructure, and so on, but they're not sufficient. We need to address this at the local scale. So the whole reason for existence of this project is the premise that if many local communities implement the SDGs, what they mean to them, being sensitive to the local context, and if that's implemented in more and more local communities, then we can also start to achieve the SDGs from the bottom up. So how can local communities achieve the global goals? So high-level goals are not always relevant to local communities. So depending on the context, it's very context sensitive, very heterogeneous. Every community is different. Every community perceives different goals to be important for them, depending on the local environment, local industry, socio-economic context, demographics, and so on. Global agreements also lack the governance necessary to facilitate on-ground change. So at a global agreement level, there's not really much teeth to get action on the ground, which happens at the local level, the landscape scale, catchment scale. And local communities also often lack capacity to understand, what can we do here? What actions are available to us? How do we make the best decisions over time, given so many different goals, very complex socio-economic targets, environmental targets, all interacting in complex ways, and there's significant uncertainty about the future. What's going to happen here and how's it going to affect us? How would that affect the decisions we make today? And so the aim of the project was to localise the SDGs, to develop a framework for co-creating bottom-up plans aligned with the priorities of local communities. So we go out and ask local communities, we work with them, we talk to them, we co-create plans, isolate individual goals that are important, characteristics of the global or national context that are important and are influential, and adapt it to the local community. So the project acknowledges that each community is different, that things are heterogeneous. So as I mentioned, each community has its own characteristics, which determine what's best for it going forward. And the aim is to develop a sense of shared ownership, to do this together with local communities, and to listen to their voice so that they're heard, and enable them to have a choice in their own pathways that they choose towards a more sustainable future. So we're asking specific questions. What external changes are important? So what is it about global or national policy, markets, economics, trends in energy, trends in the environment, climate, things like water availability and drought? What is important and influential on your local community? What SDGs, targets and indicators are most important? So perhaps it's not all of them, perhaps it's just a subset of goals. that are of interest. What can we do about it in our local community? So what changes, what options are available, what solutions are available, and how do local communities make robust decisions over time to achieve sustainable futures. So we've got all these things affecting us, we've got our priorities, we've identified things we can do, but how do we choose these in order to best achieve the goals that are important to us, given the uncertainty and these sorts of things that are coming at us? And that's what I'll talk about and focus on today. So we've got two case studies. So the forest case study, which will be the subject of talks after mine. It's a landscape, a small community, about 200 people in the Otway Ranges. So just here, here's Melbourne's. It's post-agricultural, and post-logging, so there was a vibrant logging industry, things like dairy and beef farming. It's now mostly tourism. Logging has stopped, and high-end agriculture, tourism, with things like mountain bikes and food industry. They're worried about fire, they're worried about water, sustained, inclusive economic growth, and they're worried about their ecosystems. It's one of the last remnants of tall forest in that region. The second region is Goulburn Murray, very different situation. So in forest, there's also a difference in the actual community. So in forest, not much has been done there. The community is relatively new to strategic thinking. There's not been a lot of government efforts or local governments to try and work with the community to design strategic directions and strategic futures. In contrast, the Goulburn Murray region has been on the radar for a long time because of water issues, agriculture, and sustainability around things like salinity, water supply, and ecosystem health. So the community's been consulted a lot. They're a bit tired of it, to be frank. So we've got differences in receptiveness of the local community to things like engagement processes and working on strategic thinking. Now, these people are worried about water, land degradation, water quality, ecosystem health of the river, things like economic growth, agriculture, productivity, and they're a food source, a food bowl, consider themselves to be the food bowl of the nation and probably Southeast Asia. So I'll concentrate now and just give a little bit of a general overview about how we think about making decisions into the future about what we can do to improve sustainability. So think of this as a bit like a metro map, and what we've got here is time, and we've got changing conditions over time. These are decisions that we can make, action A, action B, C and D, and this is the current situation. So the current situation actually has a use by date here. So it's going to work for us until about this time. And you might think about this as maybe it's a crop that you're growing at the moment, and it's sensitive to a lack of frost that it needs for fruiting, and they expect that the frost situation will cease about there and won't become economically viable to proceed. So maybe these are other crops or irrigation practices that you could use. So A and D are actions that you can take that'll work for a long time. We can be sure that they'll achieve our goals, and they won't be subject to any changes. They won't affect it too negatively, such that it will become unviable into the future. But they might be costly, and they might represent investments that overcapitalization in certain technology. So we've got action B, which might work for a bit longer than what we're currently doing. But then again, we'll have to change into the future. So we choose action B, and then we make another decision to see what's available, to adapt to changing conditions. Action C is viable up to a certain point, so we might choose that. And then once that becomes unviable, there's other decisions that we can make, and we can see here action B also becomes viable again into the future. So these are what we call pathways, or adaptive decision pathways that communities can make into the future. And what we do is model these quantitatively, and we can see here are the different pathways. Just you can do red, or you can do yellow then red, then yellow then, or yellow then green. Each of these have different costs and benefits and trade-offs. And even with this really toy example here, it's really impossible to tell just by looking at it which one of these pathways is best. They have different costs, different benefits, and different trade-offs. So it's a really complex decision context, and it's one that science can help with when working with local communities to identify that context, identify the solutions that are of potential. And this is how we implement that. We call this, or it's called, we didn't invent it, the dynamic adaptive policy pathways. So there are different stages here. Visioning, so we start with a visioning process with the community. What is it that we want as a community into the future? We set targets, downscale those SDGs and the targets underpinning them. Develop scenarios, so what are those important external drivers that are influential on our local community? Understand the problem analysis, understand the problem better. So what is it, where are we falling short on our targets? Formulate some actions. So this is an iterative process. We might revisit these stages, working with the community, engaging with science as well, quantitative modelling, combining those in a way that best informs the co-creation of pathways. We evaluate actions. So this is evaluating the costs and benefits over time, and then assemble the best pathways, the best decisions. What can we do over time that best adapts us to uncertain changes into the future? Set up monitoring systems, contingency planning. What if it goes wrong? What can we do? A backup plan. Formulate our plan, and then we monitor it as time goes on. And we have these triggers and flags that we look for that tell us, all right, well, if something comes up and one of our decision points is reached, then we can change tack on our adaptive decision plan. And it's a live plan that is robust to uncertainty into the future. So how do scientists work with the community at all of these different stages in order to come up with answer these complex decision problems? There's lots of different methods of working with people, what we call participatory processes, and there's lots of different quantitative, numeric, model-based analyses that can help inform various parts of our dynamic adaptive policy pathways. So how do we go about selecting which method is better for which stage? If you just work with one scientist or one researcher, researchers usually have a hammer and everything looks like a nail. Okay, so it might fit for one, might be okay for one stage. You might be a social scientist and you're good at this sort of thing, but perhaps less effective at other stages during that analysis framework. And we all have our hidden biases and motives. We're stuck in our ways of thinking as researchers. We have biases, we have mental models, that it's hard to think what is the actual best method here without having all that baggage that we bring as scientists. So what that can lead us to is one particular path dependency on how we analyze these things. So this project is about developing a general framework which can enable us to select different pairings of these quantitative analyses and participatory processes that best address each stage, most effective for each stage of that pathway, but also adapted for the local community. So I mentioned before that forests really receptive to people coming in, scientists coming in, working with them, but quite the opposite in Golden Murray. So you've got to adapt these tools for the local context. And this is a framework that we can then roll out to other communities, and they can use it to select what methods they choose in order to define their define how they analyse their pathways to sustainability. So just to implement this, we all sat around out at Burwood and scratched our heads and came up with a tool to actually work out what methods might be used for what stage. So it's a very complex diagram. But the idea is to just look at the colours on the heat map. So here's our different stages, and here's our big long list of methods that we might use at those various stages. And we're able to score and calculate amongst these practitioners in the room. And this is Goulburn, and this is Forest. And so you can see that they're very different. So Forest preferred these qualitative participatory approaches for most stages, but Goulburn preferred some more quantitative approaches because they're used to working with water models and agricultural models and things like that. But it was only for these middle stages of defining and calculating actions. And up here, they like the more qualitative stages at the beginning and at the end. So you can see how the tool was used and tailored different methods to analyse pathways to sustainability for those two really different communities. I'll finish now with just a plug for the website and also to acknowledge everybody that's worked on this. So this is not just my work, but I'm just here communicating on behalf of the whole project team, Enya, Rehana, Katrina, Nick, who's done the website, and our colleagues at Monash, of course. So Local SDGs, have a look. It's got lots of news about the project and our engagement activities and so on. And once again, thanks very much to MSDI for hosting us tonight and to all our collaborators and partners. Thank you.
One question.
Thanks, Brett. I was just wondering if you could also give a very quick overview of where the project is at in terms of time and how many more years you have to go, and where are we going? What are the next steps?
I think we've really just started. We've got a couple more years left on the project, and but having just started, we've sort of not done this equally in the two case studies. So Forest, we're quite well advanced, particularly through Katrina's work, which she'll talk about, and the really engaged community. In Goulburn, it's been a bit trickier because, well, it took a bit longer to get Rehana on board as the student working on it, and it's a little bit trickier to engage with the community, and there's been lots of work done, again, short with Forest, so we owed it to all those that have gone out and asked questions of the community before us and the community themselves to go back to all that work and synthesize it, to summarize it, to put it into SDG language, because lots of it was done before the SDGs were a thing. And so, what we'll then take to them is a product and say, look, we've listened to what you've said before. We've heard you, this is what we understand to be priorities here, and give something back to them, not just take from them. So once we've got that together, and that's not far away, we'll then use that as a tool to get it back into the community.
One more. Yeah, I'd ask, so there've been in the past lots of community visioning exercises where people go into a local community and say, what's your vision, and that's set out, and maybe even something of a strategy to get there. But this seems to be a much more sophisticated science-based approach. How do you explain that to the communities, and what's been the response to things like modelling as part of a community future, which for most people will just be mumbo jumbo?
Good question. I guess, did you put your hand up?
I was just going to say that it'll be a little bit about that.
Yeah, okay. But I guess in general, they're open to it, and they're open to a more robust decision making. They understand the complexities, and we can try and offer a way of synthesizing all of that complex choices that they've got to make and provide some evidence-based decision making, I think. In the end, they can choose to, you know, like it or lump it, but at least we've provided, you know, maybe a list of recommendations or some numerical understanding of how cost-effective different options are, when they might work and when they don't. So I think we're dealing with situations that are so complex that you know, a little help from science and modelling can only be a good thing.
Thanks.
Yeah, so it's good, I think, if we keep questions and then we can have, you know, time during the thanks, Brett. It's my pleasure to introduce now our second speaker, Katrina Szetey. Katrina is the PhD candidate at Deakin University, but today she's going to present on behalf of the forest community. Should mention that we invited representatives from the forest community, but unfortunately they couldn't make it as they had other commitments, but they asked Katrina to express their perspectives and views, as Katrina is also actively involved in the development of their town plan.
It's not working. Good afternoon, everyone. As Anya just introduced, my name is Katrina Szetey, and I'm a PhD student working on the forest case study of the Local SDGs Program. I'm here today presenting on behalf of Beth Sprunt from the forest community, as she was unable to be here today. Just to clear up there might be some confusion in my talk. If I say we, I'm talking about our program, like group, which is separate from the community perspective. Hopefully it'll be clear, but just in case. So Beth lives in the forest with her husband and family, and they run a farm using the principles of regenerative agriculture. Beth also works as a disability inclusive development consultant and is involved with many of the local forest community groups. She's employed part-time by the Forest Gateway Project Group to facilitate and administer the project. So Beth would like to acknowledge support from the Virtual Centre for Climate Change Innovation, who granted the forest community funds which enabled them to contribute to the Local SDGs Program. The Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, or DELWP, who have a close relationship with the forest community, Deakin University as project collaborators, and the forest community, forest and district community and community groups. So I'll begin with some background on how forest came to be involved in the Local SDGs Program. In 2017, DELWP ran a consultation process to decide on the future of 3 public land reserves in forest. The community voiced a strong preference to retain this land for community use, and the management was duly handed over to the community last year. The Forest Gateway project was created as a result of this process, and in 2018 they were awarded a climate change innovation grant from the state government. This grant has funded feasibility studies for a co-located bushfire adapted CFA and community facility, that's Country Fire Authority, and 3 collaborative research projects. The Local SDGs program is one of these projects in collaboration with the Ian Potter Foundation and Monash University. So one of the features of the Local SDGs Program in Forest has been the development and fostering of interagency collaborations. The Forest community worked with Deakin as a founding partner for the Local SDGs Program. The Forest Gateway Project and the Forest community work in collaboration with me, the PhD student. And we were extremely fortunate to have DELWP come on board as a community engagement partner. These collaborations have been a great strength of the program so far. So from the community perspective, Beth sees that one of the benefits of the SDGs is the way in which they are all interlinked, as this reflects the reality of life and the fact that complexity is always increasing and you can't frame the future in a linear manner. The SDG framework takes this complexity on board and enables a way to view society in a holistic and interconnected way. However, these interlinkages and their complexity also introduce challenges. The Deakin research is going to undertake modelling, and she believes this will draw out some of that complexity. The challenge with the modelling is that it has to take so many different future or unknown variables into account, related to how the Earth and people respond to climate change. There are so many variables that are almost unpredictable. For example, if there are increased numbers of fires as a result of climate change, what does that do to the water catchment, to agriculture, to jobs, to whether people rebuild or leave, and to how jobs and skill sets change as a result of the population, and to land values. She is sceptical that there are data sets that can tell you how people will respond to a bushfire and what kinds of people will choose to live in forest after the event. How do you model disaster? It's hard at this stage as the community waits for Deakin to think through the modelling, the methodology of the modelling, to understand the sorts of information that there will be at the end, and therefore how they will be able to use the information to inform planning. The community will be able to use the information to inform planning. She acknowledges that this is probably just represents a desire to see some results from the research. They are curious and definitely keen to know what we can come up with. So one benefit to the structure of the SDGs was made clear during one of the early community engagement activities that we run by the Deakin and DELWP team. During this activity, we conducted a poll in which was framed by the SDG goals and asked the participants to vote for which goals they felt were most important for the future of forest. Giving people the ability to vote for the goals they considered most important for the community enabled an equitable and democratic way to begin the conversation about community priorities and prevented the loudest voices from dominating. One barrier to community understanding of the SDGs is their very complexity. There is just so much contained within them. Having said in the previous slide that the framework enabled the beginning of conversation for community priorities, that was at the most superficial level of the goals. Once you begin to bring the targets and indicators in, the difficulty in comprehension begins to escalate. Fundamentally, the complexity of the framework is both its greatest advantage from a conceptual standpoint and its greatest disadvantage for general comprehension. There are some challenges to implementing the SDGs at a local level. Firstly, there is the paucity of data at such a scale. Forest Township has a population of 230 people. If you widen that to Forest and District, it goes up to about 400. Most ABS data doesn't go below the SA2 level, so where will the data come from? The local SDGs team has so far only focused on the goals and not on the indicators and targets. The project hasn't focused on the indicators because so far it's been deemed enough of a conversation piece, just at the level of the 17 goals, to help the community discuss and gain consensus on priorities. The Beth works professionally in disability inclusive education in developing countries and shared with me her personal experience with only 3 of the indicators for SDG 4, which is education. She told me that the increasing requirement for governments to disaggregate indicator data by disability has itself led to greater emphasis on building systems to enable more enrolment of children with disability in mainstream schools. SDG indicators are themselves consensus statements of what the world values in relation to each goal. These indicators provide a more detailed framework for governments to develop policies related to the goals. However, that experience is at a national level. Is that useful at such a small scale local level? Should the local SDGs program be looking at the indicators, or are we going to have our hands full just looking at the goals? At a small local level like Forest, a lot will depend on the availability of data for either the goals or the indicators. To conclude, the complexity of the SDGs framework is both its greatest strength and its greatest weakness. But it is unclear to what level that complexity needs to be retained for implementation at the local level, at least within the local SDGs program and with this case study. However, the community discussion which has been facilitated as a result of this program has been invaluable and has been one of the most constructive elements seen at the community level thus far. Beth and the Forest community are keen to see the results of our work.
Question. Okay. So we could probably perhaps move on to the next topic. Thanks, Katrina. Our next speaker is. Sure.
I'm just wondering, I'm just wondering in relation to the participants that were engaged in this program.
Yep.
Has distinct from employed people
Yep.
in the process. What was the common denominator amongst them, and how successful, let's say out of 10, did they achieve their aspiration thus far?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by common denominator. They're all community people from the community. So that poster that I showed you with all the sticky dots on it, we basically set up a tent outside the general store for 2 mornings on the weekend, and anyone that came by could vote in the, and we had about 55 people participating in that.
Yeah.
And they were principally community members. There might have been a few people who were like from a bit further away, like a Polio Day or something. But they were principally.
Having undergone the process of assessing those aspirational goals,
yeah.
What was the most highest denominator amongst those goals, and was it achieved, or is it in the process of being achieved?
Of the goals?
Yes.
No, we haven't even gotten so far as developing an implementation plan yet. These were aspirations, right? Yes. So we've done subsequent community engagement since then to sort of, I guess, get more detail from people as to what they. So we've done, visioning process, and just found out in general what people are concerned about in the community.
Are you asking what goals were? I'm just wondering how much skin in the game the locals have got, and what their values are. And is it them that's achieving the goals, you achieve them? If you want to have integration, you must undertake what they value most highly. Otherwise, you're running off to participation. So I'm just interested to know what it is that they value most highly, and how engaged are those people in achieving that aspiration.
I think they're engaged quite highly in it. Like everyone,
Yep.
That has participated has been very positive about. And it's definitely not like it's all their opinion and out, and it's nothing to do with our views.
So you're still in the process of identifying goals in that stage?
We're now into sort of the process of, I guess, developing like a town plan and a vision for what they would want to achieve.
Right. Okay, thanks.
I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, David Rourke. David is the regional manager in Forest and Fire Planning in the Southwest region, in the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning in Victoria. David's team has been contributing nicely and individual projects from the beginning, and
he will be sharing with us the experience and the views that they have for engaging with us.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, so this is my pleasure to be here today. We've touched on a few things around the SDGs, particularly from a DELWP perspective. There's some policy work that DELWP has done. Brett mentioned that in his presentation. Our secretary is very, very much wedded to SDGs and its implementation, and has introduced that into our corporate planning framework, and we'll be reporting on that in our report. So SDGs at a strategic level within DELWP are a high priority for us. And what's really interesting about the local SDGs program was that the conversation with the forest community was happening in tandem with that thinking within DELWP, and I became aware of the local SDGs project through the forest community, not through DELWP. So it's a really interesting way to come across SDGs. I'm certainly no expert in SDGs, but what I do have is an extremely long association with the township of forests. So, got to fess up, I was born and raised there. So it's been a pet project of mine for quite some time. Having worked with DELWP for over 35 years, and been working through the different changes in the community, like forest, and Brett touched on this, the difference between forest as a community and Golden Murray particularly. The forest community is very much in its infancy of this engagement process, but also at the cutting edge of change to their economic basis, transforming from a forestry-based economy and an agricultural-based economy to one of tourism and food and wine. So it's had a very significant shift in that, and that's relatively new. So really, that came from government decisions made in 2004. So it's only 16 years ago, and that tipped the forest community on its head in terms of what it saw as its future. The government was able to invest in that future and develop tourism opportunities, and that has built over time for that forest community. And then over time we've come along with that community in having that conversation, and I think that's been the beauty of the SDGs program as it stands now, is that the forest community is one that is ready to have that conversation. It's very much a ground up process. It's not a top down one. And to illustrate that point, DELWP has had a depot in, as Katrina touched on. DELWP's had a depot in the forest for as long as I can remember. And in a previous life, I was district manager in the Otways, and it was my decision to shift out of the forest and vacate that location and move to another location 5-7 kilometres down the road. And that really galvanised that community into action. It was on the back of another photo that Brett had up in his presentation, the White River bushfire, and things that were changing in the environment for that community and a fear of bushfire. And we want to have a bushfire refuge of last resort. I was bluntly told at a community meeting that you will build me a fire refuge on that site. And I said, really? and that led me to an engagement process that allowed the community to express its vision for the future, how it would see itself going forward. And that's opened the gates for really activated community that really wants to be in the driving seat of its future. I think that's the difference when I look at the two communities, Forest and Golden. Very, very, very early in its infancy, Forest is taking, the residents of Forest are taking their future in their own hands, and the SDGs help them do that. And it's my belief that will play out as we work through this process. And it's very much us responding to the wants of the community, not the other way around. But we're not going in there to engage with them and do engagement to them. We're there to support them in the engagement needs needs that they see they need, and to build the future that they want for their community. And they're very, very mindful of the fact that that they need to be thinking about that in the climate adaptation world. So how does that play out in terms of sustainable development going forward? And they're up for that conversation. I think that's fantastic. So it means that the people that I have available to me to support that process, I can support it. I don't have to lead it. I come in behind it. I can support and collaborate with people like Katrina and Brett and the forest community, and we can do it together. And I think that's what the SDGs is really about. It's about saying, how do we collaborate for a better future, for a more sustainable future? And it's driven by the community, it's not driven by the government. I think that's something that is the essence of the forest project. And I look at that and I go, that's a fantastic outcome. If we can get to there with this process, it's the forest community leading the way and government is catching up, which I think is a neat little way to look at that. And I look at it also, if I go back to where I started this, born and bred in forest. The pioneers who came to forest originally were looking for a brighter and better future for them and their family. And now the new pioneers of forest are doing exactly the same thing, but they've got some extra challenges in that space. But they're doing that in a really structured and supported way. And I think that's the key here. And it's been really enlightening to be part of this process with Brett and Katrina to see where that takes us. And like I said, the forest community need to be community. Beth Sprung, Emma Ashton, Peter Ashton, they were the visionaries around the Forest Gateway project and the research projects that come out of that. And we've been blessed to be able to be part of that journey with them. So I think that's, for me, is probably where I finish, but it's really about saying that the forest community is in its infancy here, but they want to lead the way, and they're not looking for somebody else to lead that way. And that's a really satisfying thing from a government perspective, being able to drive that. That's enough.
Mm.
Thanks. So welcome. Yeah. Right. So we had the names and positions of the project team on the slide, but I think with the lights you probably cannot see well. So maybe I'll just quickly introduce from that side. So you, of course, all listen to Brett, who is the program director of Local SDGs Project, and we have Dianti from Monash Sustainable Development Institute. She's a PhD candidate, but just started only a couple of months ago, really looking at issues of local governance. So she's working on the social science side of the topic. And then we have David that you all listen to. Then we have Hannah, who has also just started a PhD, and her case study specific focus is going to be on global Mari. And then we have Katrina, who also is a PhD candidate on the project, but she had started almost a year ago. And she is engaged with the forest community, so her specific focus is on forest. And then we have Dr. Malami here, who is a research fellow on the project, trying to bring everything together from modeling and social science. And my name is Shireen. I work at the Monash Sustainable Development Institute, and I lead the social science aspect of this project, working with Dianti at Monash on the project. So I guess I'm going to just start with one question, and then we can open the audience. And I understood from Andrea that there are a lot of questions that can be online. How many people do we have online?
We have, last time I checked, 14.
Okay, right. So and there are already a few questions. So I'm going to just start. Maybe it's more of a question to you, Brett, but also anyone else who wants to talk about this issue of local bottom-up action, and we all kind of agree, I think everyone agrees, that there is a real necessity for mobilizing bottom-up action if we really want to seriously do something about the SDGs and realize these goals in just 10 years' time from now. But what are the limits to local action? Like, how far can local action actually go without serious bottom-up, top-down interventions, government interventions, really? Especially when we look at the scale of issues we face today and the kind of disasters we see, bushfires and climate change and whatnot. How far can local action actually go?
Thanks for the question, Sherry. A very difficult question, and I think it's very context specific. So, what is the SDG we're looking at in particular? So, if it's things like housing and inclusiveness, then I think local action can do a lot. Get some of the socioeconomic stuff. Of course, it's going to be supported by government policy at all levels, but there are really strong improvements that local communities can make. Then on the other side of the coin, well, I guess also we all struggle day to day looking at disaster after disaster, record temperature, bushfire, flood, drought, and these oscillating extremes that we see every day. And we all wonder, what can we do ourselves? So it even goes down to the individual, not just the local community, but the individual and collectives of local like-minded people. How can we just do our bit? And essentially, when many people do their bit, it adds up. And I guess that's what the whole thinking was. Of course, we need the UN and the Paris Agreement and all of the national efforts, and we need countries to meet their targets. We need state governments, as we've seen. We need local governments. It's a huge job, a complicated job, and it needs to work at all levels to achieve the goals.
If no one has a video on this, maybe we can go through questions on Zoom.
Sure. Thank you. I can ask two. Well, I'll ask one of them. They're asking, what are the key benefits of using the SDGs as a sustainability roadmap in this project, comparing to previous sustainability approaches or previous sustainability roadmaps? Meaning, to summarize the question, what makes SDGs better than previous sustainability approaches and frameworks? Why are SDGs better?
And yeah, you're good at this.
Okay.
Well, I think there have been some major and also some gradual changes over time on the sustainability framework. But perhaps one of the major differences of SDGs framework with the development group, which was like the previous version of the global sustainability framework, is the balanced representation of economy, society, and environment. So as Brett mentioned in his presentation, the SDG framework is supposed to be something inclusive and no one is supposed to be left behind. It tries to present goals that can be issues or priorities in different contexts. It also presents more detailed level of the goals in form of targets and indicators. So it's kind of a comprehensive roadmap for sustainability. But maybe the things that need to be considered in implementation is the specific characteristics of each context. Each case.
Can you click better? Thank you.
For example, in the case of forests, the priority for the SDGs might be, so we have the roadmap. It's a general overarching guideline. But depending on the concerns and priorities of the community that we are dealing with, we may have just like few of the SDGs prior to others or adversity. Or we may have some of the indicators more important than others in creating a strong synergies for achieving sustainability.
Maybe I can also ask the auntie to comment on this because it really relates also to part of the work that you have started doing, and I know you're just at the beginning of it, but one of the things that the auntie is doing is looking at all the past local sustainability initiatives, like Local Agenda 21, for example, that was around for quite some time, and really trying to understand what we have learned from that and what are the kind of key failures, what are the key successes, and how does that translate to the SDGs now, so that we don't go about reinventing the wheel again, but really learn from past experiences. So you have started on a major review of past sustainability initiatives. What are your learnings so far? And I know you've just started that, but any key insights?
So yeah, I agree with Anaya that a major thing that SDG has in comparison to MDG would be like this emphasis on environmental sustainability. But aside from MDGs, the actual local sustainability, the global local sustainability framework that the world has is probably the Agenda 21, which has resulted from the Rio Summit at 1992. So that would be the first experience where the local government is being mandated to localize the idea of sustainability under the idea of local Agenda 21. It's a chapter in Agenda 21, which the chapter 28, which basically gives mandate to local authorities to start thinking about sustainability at the local level. But the difference between the local Agenda 21 and local SDGs is that, as far as having this literature review, is that they're pretty entrepreneurial in nature, that the agenda itself is pretty short. It's the shortest chapter in Agenda 21. So basically the local authorities are quite flexible, or like very flexible in interpreting what does it mean to be sustainable. And unfortunately, in past experiences, a lot of these local authorities translate this idea of sustainability into strictly environmental. They mandate it to the Department of Environment, and there has not been that much of a talk regarding social and the economic aspects of the local community itself. So because it's so much there's so much flexibility in local Agenda 21, I think moving from that, like what Katrina explains, in the case of forest, for example, there's this challenge of the SDGs as being too complex for like the communities to navigate around, especially with all the targets and indicators. But I think this is an attempt from the local Agenda 21 room of flexibility that probably is too much for the local government to interpret. And I think this is something that we can work on. How basically this is how we can assist the local community to navigate their way into this goals and indicators and targets of the
Another one? Okay. One, okay. Yeah. Thank you. We have questions about local government. So it's two kind of bigger questions. Did you have, well, three, did you have representation from the local government? How receptive were they to incorporate the SDGs in their own sustainability strategy? And generally, what advice do you have for local governments for incorporating the SDGs into their sustainability strategy when several SDGs and, well, when the goals and the targets appear to be more relevant than others, and many targets appear to be beyond their control, beyond the local area, the local government control? Who wants to?
I can just comment on their involvement. So there were Colac Shire, there's 2 or 3 other local governments in the Greater Otways region. They were interested, not super forthcoming in resourcing or anything like that, but certainly supportive. And I think that they wanted to just see how we went and use that as their learning and watch us dip our toe in the water rather than that. But the great value for local council is that this gives an example, an exemplar of how they can develop local plans for sustainability with their communities. And I guess it's a different suite of motivations. So for local government who are interested in things like infrastructure, waste management, water management and that sort of thing. So it's a limited subset of the SDGs, whereas things like gender equality, housing and all of that stuff is a much broader scope and mandate than local councils are responsible for. So there's a bit of a tension, a subsetting there of responsibility.
We can touch on that. Brett saying there that there was the representation from colleague Alfred, I think certification as well.
Yep.
And throughout the engagement process, I think they've been very interested, and I think very much wait and see, but they've been very receptive to the way we engage, particularly with the forest community, and seeing how we do it differently to the way local governments generally do their engagement, which is around the civil engineering related to the township structure plans and the like. So there's been possibly a shift there in terms of their interest in how we've engaged.
I'll just add here. So as part of my engagement work, I've also done a few interviews with people at Local, and they generally seem quite interested and keen to see what happens. But they seem like the general vibe I'm getting from is they're a bit hands off. Like they're happy to sit back and watch, but not necessarily get involved. And that could just be part of the dynamic between Colac and the forest community. It's been known to be a bit combative before. But the other thing that we're hoping to produce for forest is to give them a town plan or a sustainability plan, which Colac haven't done for quite a number of years. So they basically haven't had a strategic plan for the community to work towards. So I think as far as that goes, I'm very glad that we're undertaking that work because it means that they can do.
So, I can just look into the room. There are questions.
Hi, I'm Clinton. I actually work in local government, but I'm not representing. And I would certainly describe the hands-off approach as certainly not isolated to Colac Otway Shire, that's for sure. But just a couple of questions. So I'd just like to get a sense of some of the issues that communities raised and how they were framed in terms of SDGs language or the actual goals themselves. I thought it was interesting, for example, I heard that forest has a sort of a logging history, is that correct? So how that sort of works in with the local industries and attitudes towards forestry, industry and climate change and all that sort of thing. Does that have an impact, for example? And secondly, you noted you haven't looked into the targets and indicators just yet. Is there the intention to do so with the right data down the track? Thank you. Thanks for all the
So the first question was
Logging.
So there's not really there's no option for logging has been banned in the Great Otway National Park, so there is no logging industry really anymore.
I think it was framing,
but
that was an example. So what some of the issues they've raised and how they explain?
Yeah, so some of the, we're then kind of doing this in a, I guess, in a reverse direction. We started off by saying, you know, which of these goals do you think is most important for the community? But then we were getting so much good feedback just in like this free, like conversation and through free text methods that was just about the specific things that they were interested in. So we actually sort of changed tack a little bit and we went, okay, we're going to focus more on what they're telling us rather than the goals and land the goals and sort of as we go. Because I can look at what they're telling us and say, well, that's obviously this goal. So we have like a short list of, like from that, you know, sticky dot poster thing that I had in my presentation. We have a short list of goals that we've got from that are very clearly what the community is interested in. So like I think that the clear leader in that poll ended up being SDG 15, so my online. But they're also interested in climate change, like way up on their agenda. Like they're very, very concerned about bushfires, so that's public disaster resilience. They're very concerned about housing, so being a tourist economy, there's like limited numbers of houses in such a small community, and there's been a bit of tension going on with Airbnb and like the actual housing supply in the community, like the prices are going up, and so these sorts of issues. But then there's also been issues with like wastewater in the community, and so looking at SDG 6 with clean water and sanitation. The housing issue, I guess, could be sustainable. SDG 8, so sustainable communities. So yeah, like there. Does that sort of answer like? Yeah.
I'm interested in targets and indicators.
Oh yeah, so I guess we sort of work it the same way. Like we haven't got quite to the indicator level yet, but just through the work I've been doing, again, like with what they're telling me, I can go, okay, well, so that's climate bushfires means climate action, which is the target that's related to disaster resilience. So I can work it backwards from what they're telling me. I don't necessarily have to say, oh, point to the target from an indicator, so that's what we're concerned about.
I think it's that question probably generated from my discussion, and I think the thing that's worth recognising here is that the forest community is one of transition still. So John was out of the room when I was speaking earlier, but John led the change in as the Environment Minister back in 2004 around the cessation of logging on public land in Thwaites, and that led to a momentous change for communities in Thwaites, and it took a while for that to settle. To 2008 before that was resolved, and then you've got to build the momentum around the tourism economy, and that's now starting to play out for a small team like forest, and there are those issues around wastewater, sanitation, issues around housing affordability, the potential for it to become an exclusive enclave, much like Warren, landlocked, can't grow. So there's the idea around what does sustainable development look like for a small economy in transition, but it's quite clearly in transition. People are investing in forest, they're building new businesses. The children in forest can get a job in forest and in the tourism industry, and that's occurred over 16 years. It's actually a pretty short time frame if you think about it, but it's still a community in that transition. But they're in the driver's seat. I think that's the difference here. They're wanting to drive their future rather than say what more somebody else do for me. I think that's the message.
Good point. I'll just bring Rahana into the discussion and extend it to the Goulburn Murray region, which is an area also in transition. So water's going out of that environment, out of agriculture, back to the environment. So seeing a lot of turnover structural change in the agricultural sector, and a very different prognosis. So it's one of real adaptation and struggle, and a different mindset in adapting to change rather than forest or proactive, see opportunity. And can I ask Brett just to comment on the goals of interest there? And we've done this through a very different process, which was because there's been so much strategic work already done in that region. So Rehan has gone back to all the older documents, strategic documents, plans and industry reports and so on, and synthesised all of those and extracted all of the SDG-like statements out of there to try and synthesise the priorities, rather than going back to the community and asking them again and again and again the same sorts of questions. So.
Hi everyone. I had started my PhD around 5 months ago. I have started to review the policy documents at different references about the Golden Murray, which, as most of you know, is famous for the agriculture in Victoria and its effects on the economy and even in Australia. So because of this, until now, if I wanted to tell you about the priority of the SDGs in this region and the main concerns of the local community in this region, it's include water resources management is so important among all of them, and then environmental management that's related to the ecosystem and also biodiversity in this region, and the climate action and climate change effects in this region, especially because of its effects on the reduction and decrease the amount of water for agriculture, which is important in this region, and the local community and the farmer family is worried about the decrease in the amount of food production in this region. Also, climate change have other effects on the environment, either river health and in salinity and bushfire, floods, and recent environmental disasters that we can see. Also, in this region, irrigation systems is inefficient and need to improve and need to renovate in future, which have started from the previous years, but need to continue in the future because of roughly around 30% of annual water lost in this region because of inefficient irrigation systems. So the most important challenge and concerns in this region related to the water, environment, climate change, and agriculture.
Any other questions?
Hi, I'm Karen. I'm also from local government, and I've got a number of questions actually, but I'm going to start with just, I'm wondering what the process is for engaging with local government more broadly. And granted, you've got a couple of case study areas in Golden Murray region and in the Thwaites. But I myself, and I know some of my colleagues have already looked at the SDGs and looked at our council strategies, policies, programs, indicators, things that we've measured, things that we've talked about with our communities, and said, well, beyond just the environmental division, there's actually quite a lot that we're doing right across all of those things. And I think there's a really great resource to be tapping into there. To actually look at how that works. So I guess my question is, has that actually been addressed through this program? And the next question is, how do you stand something like this up? Because it's really fantastic, but and I congratulate you all. I think you did the first. I think it's fantastic work. I look forward to having half a dozen PhD candidates in my municipality to look at the different communities. There must be, some other way that will actually scale this up to deliver it right across the country.
So I think with regard to the sustainability of the program, I think one of the important things that Brett also introduced in his presentations was the general framework that would be one of the in and out of this project. And the fact that we, first of all, we remain flexible in terms of the tools and techniques that we offer to local governments, to local communities, to chart and develop their own pathways. And second, to be as simple as possible and as systematic as possible to perhaps better communicate different components, different stages that they need to take, and different processes that they need to implement. But this is just a general framework, and depending on the context and the cases that we have, the nuances of implementation will be different. So my sense is that there would be probably a long-term collaboration between researchers and practitioners and local governments to perhaps expand this idea of local SDGs to different communities, to different states. And once it becomes more established, but once it becomes perhaps better recognized within the local governments, then I think that's something that we could be more hopeful about the scale up of the program.
And so my first question is just about looking beyond just environmental groups within council. Our economic development strategy, our infrastructure strategy, our existing partnerships. I think if you look at the council's broader strategies, there's probably a lot more overlap with the other 16 SDGs.
That's true, yeah. Does everyone else? Yeah, I think again it's some things context dependent, like the SDGs that we should look into. But I totally agree that it's definitely beyond the environmental goals. So we did a review of past literature in the local sustainability recently. And one of the things that we observed was that the topic of local sustainability in general has not been discussed consistently across all the SDGs. And SDG 16 and 17 basically share the major part of literature with regard to local sustainability. And SDG 16 and 17 are related to effective institutions and also effective public and private partnership. So I think this has an important lesson that these two SDGs are crucial in implementing the broader framework, in the sense that first of all they interact with other goals, and second they lay the groundwork for achieving goals with respect to energy, with respect to quality water, and other goals. And perhaps these two specific sustainable development goals could be perhaps closer to the role that local government has.
Other questions?
If there's not, I have one more, but not
Hello, Andrew Marsman. I also applaud you on this work. I think it's actually fantastic. I suppose as a practitioner, I've been working in Timor-Leste for the past 12 years on a community forestry program, and we have used the SDGs as a way to be able to benchmark the work we're doing. And I think they're really important in that way, that if we can all pick them up, we can all use the same framework. So we can all use the same framework and see that we're achieving the same sorts of goals. The issue I have though is when we had a work that we were doing with the Gold Standard Foundation, which is a certifying body that allows us to be able to work out how much carbon is stored in forests. One of the things that they require is that you identify the 3 of the SDGs. And when we started having a look at the 3 SDGs, we initially saw the SDGs and we picked off 10. Yeah, we're addressing poverty, we're addressing hunger, we're addressing mortality. But when you start to have a look down at the targets and indicators, it becomes really difficult, and I think the point was made at the start of the conversation, that it becomes really difficult for small community activities to be able to identify what indicators are actually addressing, because the indicators have been designed for countries to address. I'm just wondering whether you're going to look at the idea of getting indicators that can be used by community and understood by community.
Thanks. I need to press it. Oh, yeah, good question. And it's right about now where we're starting to get into the modelling of quantifying SDGs, quantifying the changes into the future in different goals and how we progress towards them or otherwise, and also the effectiveness of different solutions that we might put in place or interventions to become closer to the SDGs rather than further away. So these require, practical, measurable, repeatable metrics of achievement, and some of those some SDGs have those, and others are a bit further away from that, where they simply have qualitative aspirations. And at the local scale, that requires thinking about both about what are meaningful indicators for housing or inequality or water quality or whatever. And this will change with the different contexts as well. So water quality in the developing country is a different metric to water quality in a developed country. So that is the process where we're at now. What kinds of things do we model? What are the key indicators that we can quantify? And also then that's going to be mapped against what data is available. So there's that, that practical matter of actually being able to do it, which is strong influence on what indicators to select as well. So it's a combination of those two things that will sort of drive the next phase of work into modelling the impacts of different interventions and different futures on the SDGs.
Oh.
One up the back.
There's one over there.
G'day, my name's Daniel. I just have a question about the way in which SDGs translate into context. So I was thinking about what Yanti's said about the local government and the way that they focus on environmental issues, and then also I think Katrina was talking about the focus on individual issues. So like there's so much in there that you can sort of pick up on whatever you want. So it almost becomes a little bit like a tutor intervention, and so which makes me wonder about whether it actually captures the most significant issues within this community. So do you think that we're trying to impose a framework in a context where it wasn't initially designed, and that the complexity means that we may be better off, I don't know, taking a different direction than this sort of thing?
Thanks. That's a really good question. I think that SDG can be used perhaps in different ways. It doesn't necessarily need to impose any sort of complexity to the community for achieving their sustainability goals. It could be more used as a like overarching framework that can show us the diversity of things that can represent the sustainable development. I think researchers can have a role here to researchers and also local agencies to simplify or perhaps translate this complexity to the local community. It doesn't need to like start from the whole framework, like what Katrina said and also what she presented. During our engagement process with the forest community, we didn't start by telling people about the 17 goals and different indicators that they had. We basically kept it open to just collect any form of concerns and issues that they raised. And then it was our job to frame this collected information into the framework of SDGs, into different goals, into different targets. So I think it could be something perhaps, I agree with the complexity, but I think first of all it could be perhaps a gradual process. So we like interact with the local community to see to what extent we can communicate the things that exist in the SDG framework. That's one thing that can be done. The second thing is the use of, so once we collect the information in a very broad generic sense from the community member, then I think the use of like modeling techniques, computational techniques, computer-based techniques could kind of help us to deal with some aspect of this complexity. It's of course impossible to totally get rid of the like numerous interactions and synergies that could be possible. But with, like for example, the computer simulations, we can find out how different goals could interact in a 10 years time. And then we can again interpret and translate the results and present it to the community for reality checking and for validation. So I think there should be probably a role for translating, for simplifying, for make sensing of like all the frameworks and the results to the community.
Yeah, adding to that, I think in this way, the complexity that SDG has, aside from something that we need to work on, is something that I see as an opportunity for us to sort of assess the community to really think about what the challenges that the community face. Because from my experiences, company Katrina and I in Brest, twice the president was listening to us at the opening house. We were listening and talking with the local community about what they think about this 17 goals. So like what and Katrina said, we didn't really explain it to them first, but then we sort of giving them prompts like housings, like terrestrial, like sort of like something that they can think at local context. And I was amazed about how articulate the local community thinking about the future of the community itself. And I think reflecting on the literature review that I have about the past local sustainability framework experience, the local agenda 21, the biggest problem about the past experience is that there was a lot of confusion about what would the local community believe as their local challenges. Meanwhile, I think in the case of SDGs, because we have these 17 goals, which can be a starting point for us to talk about actual challenges on the ground. I think it's a great start to sort of navigate the community to really think about real challenges on the ground, as opposed to just come and like ask them, okay, what are your the challenges of the local community? So I think this complexity in a way is an opportunity for us to really make sense of the actual challenges happening at the local level.
I just take one more question on Zoom because everyone else will have a chance to interact with the team while we are having drinks outside, but maybe for people on Zoom who won't have that chance.
Thank you. We have one more question. How is the project making specific efforts to engage Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in connecting to the SDG framework within their own countries and with local SDG community projects?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, there's numerous points of engagement there with Indigenous communities, both in the forest in Goulburn and in another project that we've been working on that's aligned in the Tiwi Islands. So the various Indigenous groups have, like the local councils, given us support, but we haven't yet engaged them in as much as we'd like. Katrina might be able to comment on that more. So there's the various Indigenous groups who we've had support from, but I guess the most direct engagement is in this Tiwi project, and the issues, that's an ARC funded project that's aligned with this, the local SDGs, but the issues there around biodiversity conservation, around fire, around Indigenous livelihoods, Indigenous land management, self-determination, local viability of local communities and so on, and tourism, all of these issues coalescing and coinciding around the SDGs, but in, again, a totally different community. So a tropical island of Australia's almost completely Indigenous and almost completely natural. And so this again gives us another contrast to test this framework, to test its reliability and its robustness in another very different context.
Just wanted to touch on the complexity issue, and I'm blessed with a team that plays in the bushfire modelling space, and from that perspective, the SDGs, whilst they're complex, being able to model them and base them in a community context provides an opportunity for decision support. So if you do these things, these might be the outcomes. Which one will you choose? It allows that conversation to continue with the community. So using techniques like structured decision making and decision support, backed up by modelling and allowing that conversation to continue is really important. And that's what this work's really aimed at. It's almost like a proof of concept, and then we can expand it, we can grow it, and be able to expand it once we understand how that works and what sort of decisions and support. So I think that's a really important takeaway as well.
We might just leave it here, and we'll have more time if you want to chat or ask questions to the session. Please feel free to do so. We'll be around for this another half an hour while we're having drinks. So thanks everyone for joining us.
Can I, on behalf of all of us, thank all the speakers and the panel members. You've been great. This was our first
SDG in Action seminar event. So I'll be really interested to hear any feedback, and as will Tal as we have a drink now. I see this as a really great opportunity to really set up a bit of a community of practice around the SDGs, where every month or so we can get together around an interesting topic, bring the expertise that we've got from people like our speakers, but also from people who come like yourselves, whether it's local government or from academia or business, and gradually build up the capacity we've got as a community to address these really complex problems. I think it's really good to challenge the research we're doing, to question complexity, to question what we're doing. And I think if we do that, we're going to come up with much better solutions. So thank you to everyone. Thank you to Tal and your team for putting it together, Monash, SDSN, and once again, we thank the speakers.